Welcome to the first video in our how-to or tips and tricks series. This video, we're going to program a CORTEX Gyro with a central box on a JETI system. So let's dive into the programming. Hopefully this helps you. This is one of the most asked questions that I get. All right, so programming the CORTEX. First thing you need to do is make sure you actually have the proper setup on your radio. So you need a gyro on-off switch. In our case, it's SF. For this plane, it will be SH eventually. But when you go to the gyro menu, you need to have a gyro on-off switch because it needs to read 0. So in our case, we operate with flight modes. So we've got minus 55% as our gain, 65% for takeoff flaps, 75% for landing flaps. So landing, we have more gain than when we're regularly flying. In any of these modes, the switch turns it off. So you need to have that set up. When you do your programming, when you're going right aileron, left aileron, forward elevator, back elevator, right rudder, left rudder, gyro off, that's how you teach the stick limits to the CORTEX. But first we need to tell it what radio system we're using. So we've got a bind plug, a radio, power, and I'll show you the next steps. All right, now some of the things you want to do with this setup is I'll show you how we've got things laid out. So we're going to go into our device explorer. So we've got our Rec 7, CORTEX Pro, all this stuff's done already. And what we're doing is we're going to go into our Rec 7 and we've got our general settings. That's all fine. Alternative pin configuration. So we've got E1 and E2 set up as EX bus. That's just the easiest way to do it. So one other little trick for you, when you're programming the gyro, if you happen to be doing it in your shop or at the field and you've got your plane on a stand, you want to make sure that your flaps are in the off condition or regular flying condition, but also importantly, have your nose gear or gear in the down position. We don't use any of the gyros with the gear controllers. Everything we do here in the shop is done through the CORTEX itself. So our nose steering is all taken care of by the CORTEX, but in order to have the CORTEX recognize your nose steering, the gear needs to be down, or at least with our programming, because we've got the gear as not working when the gear is up. All right, so we're going to put power to our receiver system. So that's done. And when we pull that bind plug out of the core of the central box, that's going to turn the system on. So for teaching the radio system type, programming port is open right now. We're going to turn this on. We've got receiver plugged into port A on the CORTEX right there. And 6 is going to R1 on the central box. So we are going to pull our bind plug out. That turns the system on. The gyro shouldn't initialize. And then we're going to plug in our programming plug. So you start to get blue blinks. And what you're looking for in this case is we're using a single receiver hooked up to the CORTEX. So we're going to wait for this to switch to single blue slow blink, which it is, and that is good. So now what we do is we turn our power off. So we take our bind plug, put it in the switch port. Now it's important, it doesn't work if you don't do this. Take primary receiver, plug it into port B. That is very important. All right, so we've moved the primary receiver over to port B. We still have our bind plug installed. Now when we pull this out, we're going into programming mode. Now if we had surfaces hooked up, they would move, but we just have our light to look at. So it's going to double bump, right aileron, left aileron, forward elevator, back elevator, right rudder, left rudder, and gyro off or on. Blinks a whole bunch of times, you know it's programmed properly, and we can pull our bind plug out and power down our system. Now, when we turn the system back on, that should bind and do its thing properly. So this is why you want access to the gyro programming port. So let's say you did that setup. We do it one more time before the maiden because we get our surfaces all set up. And then you take a plane out for the maiden flight, do a bunch of trimming on it. You go for your next flight, and you notice when you start your plane up, you don't get the double bump on the surfaces. You're always looking for the double bump. So you don't get the double bump on the surfaces. You power down your system, put the programming port or plug in, or bind plug in the programming port, go through that learning process that I just showed you, and then you're good to go, and you should be fine unless you do a bunch of trimming again. So that is why we will also run a program extension port over to this area so we've got access with a bind plug. So now we're going to turn our system back on, and you'll see the Cortex go through its normal process. And again, if we had surfaces hooked up, you would get a double bump. But there we go. So gyro off, turn the volume on here.
Gyro on.
Gyro on, we get the amber color. Gyro off is red.
Gyro
You're always looking for the amber. The bank number 2 that you don't want to use on a regular airplane is the green one. This is amber, it's kind of yellowy. The green is like green. So anyways, gyro is now programmed. Good to go. All right, so I like to do the setup with just one receiver for everything. Then once the plane's done and we start getting things laid out, that's when you can add more receivers. So we'll go into the Cortex Pro here, and I'll just show you quickly the different setups that you have. So we've got analog, digital. So generally most of the new servos, if you're using a new servo, at least the ones we use from MKS, they're going to be digital 333. Socket orientation, upright front. We pretty much default to that for installation kind of all the time, but it's good just to double check that in case you've got your Cortex oriented in a different manner. Now the dual RX, this is an important one. With our setup, we're only using a clone receiver, our default mode, so we've got one receiver going into the Cortex, so we just leave that off. But if you happen to be using dual path, then you can switch dual receiver to on. Now it's important, if you read the instructions, the primary receiver is port B, and the secondary receiver is port A, but we've covered all that during the programming portion of this video. So these are all items you can change afterwards, and then with JETI as well, you've got access to all the banks and stuff. So you've got your yellow bank and green bank, and you've got your single gain channel. So if you find that maybe your nose steering needs to be adjusted as an example, this is where you can adjust those individual channels, and you've got access to your first 16 channels on both the yellow bank and the green bank. All right, so that basically wraps up this video. This again is my most asked question that I get asked on such a regular basis. So hopefully if you have this question, this helps you guys out. Send the video to friends. So if they're having the same question, this can help them out. That's the purpose of this video, how to program JETI radio with Cortex using a central box. So couple important things. Thank you to channel members for supporting the channel. Channel members get to see our videos early before they get released to everybody. So that's the perk of being a channel member. So thank you, channel members. Second thing is don't forget to check out the lighter side of RC After Dark. After Dark is a completely separate channel for us. We do live streams here from the shop, and it's tons of fun. If you're on during the live stream, you get to ask us questions, interact with us. We answer it during the live. It's a blast. I love it. It's fun. And so check it out, lighter side of RC After Dark. Thanks guys so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.